The spring thaw came late to the Alberta foothills in 1889, and when it finally arrived, it came mean. Not the gentle kind that softened the ground gradually, but the sudden kind that flooded the creek crossings and turned every dirt road into something closer to a river. The kind of spring that reminded you the land didn't care whether you were ready or not. Adeline Marsh had learned not to wait for ready. She sat in the back of the mail wagon, her one good bag wedged between her feet and the postmaster's crates, watching the foothills rise up on either side of the road like the land was trying to swallow the sky whole. She'd been traveling since Thursday. It was now Sunday. She knew because the driver, a quiet man named Mr. Peabody, who hadn't offered more than a dozen words since Lacombe, had mentioned the church bells when they passed through the last small settlement. She hadn't been inside a church in 2 years. Her mother's letter was folded in the pocket of her coat. She didn't need to read it again. She had it memorized. The Kincaid man is decent. Widower. 3 children. The youngest is only 4. He needs someone to keep the house and mind the little ones, and he's willing to pay a fair wage. You have nothing left there, Adeline. Come, nothing left there. That was one way to say it. Her father's debts had taken the house first, then the furniture, then everything else that could be sold. What couldn't be sold, her mother's good dishes, the quilt from her grandmother's hands, had gone to the creditors anyway. And Adeline, 23 years old and more capable than most men twice her age, had been left with a bag, a coat, and an aunt in Red Deer who'd made it clear within a week that the arrangement was temporary. She hadn't blamed the aunt. She'd just left before being asked to. So here she was, bouncing along a wagon track that barely deserved the name, heading toward a ranch she'd never seen, owned by a man she'd never met, to care for children she knew nothing about. The practical part of her brain, which was most of it, said, "You've done harder things." She wasn't sure that was true, but she told herself it was. The Kincaid place came into view just as the afternoon light started going golden and long across the fields. Adeline saw the ranch house first, low and square, built for function rather than beauty, with a wide covered porch that sagged slightly on the left side. A barn stood a short distance away, newer looking than the house. There were fences everywhere, some in good repair, some not. 2 horses moved in the far paddock. Smoke rose from the chimney. Mr. Peabody pulled the wagon to a stop at the gate. "This is you," he said, his longest sentence yet. Adeline picked up her bag, climbed down without waiting for help, and stood on the road while the wagon rolled away. The mud sucked at her boots. She looked at the gate, which was standing open, and then at the house. And then she walked forward because there was nothing else to do. She was halfway up the path when the door opened. The man who stepped out onto the porch was not what she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. He was taller than average, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had been weathered by years of outdoor work into something angular and difficult to read. He wasn't old, late 30s maybe, but he moved like a man who'd been carrying weight for a long time and had forgotten what it felt like without it. He looked at her the way you'd look at the weather, assessing, not unkind. "Miss Marsh," he said, "not a question. Mr. Kincaid." A pause. He glanced at her bag, then back at her face. "You're younger than I expected. You're quieter than I expected." She hadn't meant to say it, but she didn't take it back. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. "Come inside. It's cold." The house smelled like wood smoke and boiled potatoes, and the particular staleness that accumulates when a place is kept clean but not loved. Adeline noticed all of it in the first 3 seconds. She noticed everything. The stack of mending on the chair by the window, the muddy boot tracks that hadn't been wiped, the tin of crackers left open on the table. 3 faces watched her from across the room. The oldest was a boy, maybe 13, with his father's dark hair and the kind of expression that had decided things before she'd even opened her mouth. He stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall like he owned it. Beside him, a girl of about 9 stood very straight, her chin tipped up slightly. She had a serious face, the kind that belonged on someone much older, and in front of them both, half hidden behind his sister's skirt, was a small boy. 4 years old maybe, with his thumb in his mouth and his eyes very wide. Nobody spoke. Adeline set her bag down by the door. "My name is Adeline," she said. "I'm very glad to meet you." The oldest boy's eyes narrowed. "Why? Because your father wrote that you need someone, and I need somewhere to be." That seemed like a good place to start. The boy didn't say anything, but something in his face changed, barely, like a door that had opened just a crack before slamming shut again. "This is Bram," Kincaid said from behind her, meaning the oldest, "and that's Louisa. The small one is Kit." Adeline looked at each of them in turn. Bram, Louisa, Kit. "Hello," Louisa said very formally. Kit removed his thumb from his mouth just long enough to say hello back, then replaced it. Bram said nothing. Kincaid showed her to her room, a small space off the back of the kitchen, barely big enough for the narrow bed and the chest of drawers that took up most of it. There was a window that looked out onto the yard, and through it she could see the barn and the edge of the hills beyond. It's fine, Adeline said. There's work, Kincaid said. He leaned in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets. I won't pretend otherwise. The house, the children, meals. Louisa helps when she can, but she's got her schoolwork. Bram's with me most days. What about Kit? He's with whoever's in the house. All right, Kincaid studied her for a moment. His eyes were a dark, unremarkable brown, the kind you might forget, except that they were very direct and never seemed to look away when you were looking back. I paid for your passage, he said. I want you to know that wasn't meant as, it's not a debt. You're not obligated to stay if it doesn't suit you. It will suit me, Adeline said. You don't know that yet. No, but I know I'm not going anywhere until I do. He nodded once and left. Adeline unpacked her bag, which didn't take long. She smoothed the blanket on the bed, looked out the window at the yard for a moment, and then went to find Kit, who had followed her down the hall and was now sitting very solemnly outside her door. Would you like to help me find the kitchen? She asked. He nodded. He took her hand without being asked. That was the first thing. The days accumulated. Adeline woke before dawn and rebuilt the fire. She learned where everything was kept. The flour, the salt, the tin of lard, the battered pot that was the only one big enough for soup. She learned that Louisa took her tea with no sugar and always left the last bite of everything on her plate. She learned that Kit needed to be held during thunderstorms, and that he would never tell you this directly, but would simply appear beside you and press his whole small body against your leg until it passed. She learned that Bram watched her the way a dog watches something it hasn't decided is safe yet. She hadn't managed to change that, not in the first week and not in the second. He was polite in the way that felt worse than rudeness, careful and distant and correct. He answered when spoken to and helped when asked and never once gave her any reason to complain, and she understood that this was its own kind of wall. His mother had died 18 months ago. Adeline didn't ask how. She waited. Kincaid, she had not yet started calling him anything else, worked from before dawn until after dark most days. He came in for meals, ate efficiently, thanked her quietly, and went back out. Sometimes in the evenings he sat at the table going over papers, the ranch ledger open in front of him, and she'd catch the way his jaw sat tight and his eyes went somewhere that wasn't the page. She didn't ask about that either. She asked about the horses, because she knew horses, and that surprised him. She asked about the fences, because they needed work she could see from the window. She asked about the planting schedule for the kitchen garden, because there was a cleared patch of earth behind the house that had been left idle. You can do what you like with it, he said about the garden. What did the previous? What was it used for before? A pause. My wife kept it. I see. You don't have to. Adeline looked at the cleared patch of earth through the kitchen window. Someone should. He didn't say anything. She didn't look at him. But the next morning she found a spade leaning against the back door. No note, no explanation. She planted potatoes and turnips and a row of hardy kale. She didn't plant flowers because this was Alberta in May and it was still cold at night and she was a practical woman. But she thought about it. The thing with Bram happened in the third week. Adeline had gone to the barn to bring in the eggs. Kincaid had mentioned that morning that one of the hens had started laying in an odd corner, and she'd found Bram there already, sitting on an overturned bucket in the back of the barn, his head bent over a piece of paper. He startled when she pushed open the door and shoved the paper behind him. Sorry, Adeline said. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't. His voice was flat. He stood up ready to leave. Bram, she said it carefully. What were you drawing? His face shut down. Nothing. I'm not asking to look at it. I'm just asking. He stood there for a moment, clearly calculating whether this was a trap. Then slowly he took the paper from behind him and held it out. It was a drawing of the ranch. Pencil, careful and exact. The barn, the house, the fences, the hills behind. It was very good. Better than very good. Your mother taught you? Adeline guessed. The muscle in his jaw tightened. She said I had an eye for it. She was right. He took the paper back. His hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. I'm not trying to be her, Adeline said quietly. I know that's not what this is. I'm just here to help, and if that ever means anything more than cooking and laundry, I'd like to know. Bram looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Pa doesn't know I draw. Then perhaps that's something that belongs just to you, Adeline said. She went and found the eggs and left him there. That evening she noticed Bram had stacked the firewood without being asked. She didn't comment on it, but she saw it. The trouble came in late May, which was when most trouble came to the foothills, when the ground was soft and the work was heavy, and everyone's patience was already spent from a long winter. A man came riding up to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon, while Kincaid was out mending fence on the east side of the property. Adeline was in the yard hanging washing. She didn't know him. He was well dressed for the country, riding a good horse, and he had the kind of manner that suggested he knew it. "I'm looking for Kincaid," he said without dismounting. "He's not here right now." Adeline kept her hands on the laundry. "Can I help you?" The man looked at her the way some men looked at women who answered questions directly, like it was a surprise they found mildly irritating. "Sutherland," he said. "I own the property to the east. Tell Kincaid I came by. Tell him I've made a second offer and I won't be making a third." "I'll tell him," Adeline said. Sutherland looked around the yard, taking in the sagging porch, the patched fences, the general appearance of a place being kept together through effort rather than money. "Tell him not to be proud about it," he said, and rode off. Adeline went back to the laundry. Her hands were very steady. When Kincaid came in that evening, mud-caked and tired, she told him. His face went still in a way she'd learned to recognize, not anger exactly, but the place anger came from. "How much?" he said. He didn't say. Kincaid sat down at the table. He didn't reach for the ledger. He just sat there, staring at the surface of the wood. "The East Quarter's the best grazing land I've got. Without it." He stopped. "What did you tell him the first time?" Adeline asked. She poured tea and set it in front of him without asking if he wanted it. "No, and now?" He looked up at her. "Still no, then there's nothing to worry about tonight. There's plenty to worry about." His voice was quiet, not sharp, just tired. "The roof needs replacing before winter. Bram's boots are too small and he hasn't said anything. The east fence line is worse than I thought. And if this dry spell holds another month, the creek crossing might not hold." Adeline sat down across from him. He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. "The roof," she said. "What's the worst of it? Back corner. Over the storage room. I can patch it. You can't patch that roof. I've patched worse. My father's house had a roof that should have come down in 1883. It didn't." She folded her hands on the table. "What else?" He stared at her for a moment. Then he picked up the tea. "Bram's boots," he said. "I noticed too. He won't ask. No, he won't." They sat in a silence that was different from the ones before it, less empty. "I'll take him to town Saturday," Kincaid said finally. "He'd like that," Adeline said. She didn't say. "He's drawing maps of this land because he loves it and you don't know." She thought it might be something Kincaid needed to discover on his own. Louisa was the one Adeline understood most easily. She was solemn and organized and intensely private about the things that mattered to her, which was a way of being in the world that Adeline recognized without difficulty. One afternoon, Louisa came to her with a spelling book and a problem. "I can't remember," she said, "whether it's I before E except after C or the other way around." Adeline looked at the book. "It's I before E except after C. Mostly isn't very useful." "No, English is inconsistent." Louisa considered this gravely. "Like people, yes," Adeline said. "Exactly like people." Louisa sat down beside her without being invited, and they went through the spelling book together, and after that it became a habit. Louisa bringing her schoolwork to the kitchen table in the evenings, sitting near Adeline without requiring conversation, just proximity. Kit, meanwhile, had decided Adeline was his. He brought her things. Smooth stones, a beetle he'd found, a piece of blue ribbon that had come from somewhere she never identified. He called her Miss Addie because he couldn't manage Adeline, and she didn't correct him. It was Kit who finally broke through to her in a way she hadn't expected. It was a Saturday night, late, long after he should have been asleep. She heard it, small feet on the floor, and then quiet outside her door, and then nothing for a long time. She got up and found him standing in the hallway, not crying, not asking for anything, just standing there in his nightshirt with his blanket dragged along behind him. "Hey," Adeline said softly. "Bad dream?" He shook his head. "What is it then?" He looked up at her. He had his mother's coloring, lighter than Kincaid, with a round face that still had the softness of early childhood in it. "I forgot what Mama smelled like," he said. The words hit her somewhere behind the ribs. She crouched down so she was level with him. "Tell me something else you remember." He thought about it seriously. "Her hair was long. She let me hold it sometimes. That's a good thing to remember. Do you think she knows I forgot?" Adeline was quiet for a moment. She had learned in the past year that some questions needed to be met honestly rather than easily. "I don't know where people go," she said, "but I think the love stays. That part doesn't go anywhere." Kit considered this. Then he climbed into her arms, blanket and all, and pressed his face into the side of her neck, and she held him there in the hallway until he was heavy with sleep, and then she carried him back to his bed and sat with him until his breathing evened out. She stayed there a long time after. When she finally went back down the hall, Kincaid was standing at the kitchen doorway. He'd clearly been awake. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything, and then he turned and went to his room and closed the door. But in the morning he had rebuilt the fire before she came down, which he had never done before. June arrived, and with it the hard work of summer. Adeline mended and planted and cooked and hauled water. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, which were not gentle. The mornings started before light. The evenings ended when there was nothing left to keep you awake. In between was work, continuous, specific physical work that left your hands rough and your back sore and your mind, paradoxically, clearer than it had been in years. She found she didn't mind it. She found, in fact, that she was happier here than she'd been in the house she'd grown up in. In the last few years of it, her father's moods, the debts accumulating quietly in the background like water under the floorboards. This was harder in some ways, but it was honest. She was outside one evening in early July, turning the kitchen garden over with the spade while the last of the light lasted, when she heard Kincaid behind her. "You don't have to do that tonight." "I know." She kept working. He stood there for a moment. Then, "You're going to ruin that shoulder if you keep wielding it like that." "My shoulder is fine." "Turn it the other way." She stopped, looked at him. He was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her with a look she'd learned to identify as he's about to be helpful and uncomfortable about it. "Show me then," she said. He came forward and she handed over the spade without ceremony, and he showed her the angle, efficient and economical, and she watched his hands and how he moved and stored it away for later the way she stored everything. "Like that," he said. "Like that," she agreed. He handed the spade back. Neither of them moved for a moment. "The potatoes are doing well," he said finally. "There'll be enough for winter. My wife always grew potatoes." He said it like he was checking whether the words hurt. They seemed to. Not as much as he'd expected. "That's a sensible thing to grow in this climate," Adeline said. Something that might have been a laugh moved across his face. "Just barely. You're a very practical woman, Miss Marsh. There are worse things to be." He picked up a clod of earth that had been overturned near the edge of the bed, turned it over in his hands. "I meant to say, the children seem better, since you came." He said it like the words were costing him something. "Louisa smiles more. Kit follows you everywhere." A pause. "Even Bram is grieving," Adeline said. "He just does it very quietly. He takes after his mother in that. She let that sit between them." "How long had you been married?" she asked. She asked it carefully, the way you approach something that might be fragile. 14 years. We were very young." He set the clod of earth back down, brushed his hands against his trousers. "She was better at this than I am, all of it. The house, the children, making it feel like a place rather than just a set of buildings." He looked out at the hills. After she died, it went quiet, and I couldn't figure out how to make it not quiet. Adeline looked at him. The evening light was soft on the land behind him, and he looked for a moment like a person rather than a task to figure out. "You're doing it," she said. "What? Making it not quiet." "Badly, maybe, but you're doing it." He looked at her then, and she held his gaze, and something passed between them that she didn't try to name. "Better get inside," he said. "Supper'll go cold." She went. The trouble with Sutherland came back in August. Kincaid came home from town one afternoon with a look she'd come to recognize, the one he wore when he was deciding how much to say and landing on less than everything. He didn't tell her at dinner. He waited until the children were in bed and she was washing the last of the dishes. And then he stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Sutherland filed a claim on the East Quarter." Adeline turned around. "On what grounds?" "Says there's a boundary survey error from the original land grant. His lawyer sent a letter to the land office in Edmonton." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Even if he's wrong, fighting it costs money I don't have." She dried her hands on the cloth. "Do you have the original papers?" "Somewhere. Find them." He looked at her. "It might take a week to dig through everything. Then we start tonight." They sat at the kitchen table until past midnight, going through the box of papers he found in the bottom of the wardrobe in his room. Deeds, surveys, old letters, the accumulated documents of a place built piece by piece. Adeline organized. Kincaid read and translated, because some of the older survey language meant nothing to her. They drank tea that went cold. At some point Louisa appeared in the doorway, saw them, and went back to bed without a word, like a child who had learned to understand adult silences. By the end, they had what they needed. The boundary markers were clear. The survey was not in error. "You can write to the land office yourself," Adeline said. "You don't need a lawyer for this." Kincaid looked at the documents spread across the table. "How do you know how to do this?" "My father had debts." "Debt means legal documents. Legal documents mean reading them very carefully." She stacked the papers. "Write the letter tomorrow. I'll help you with the wording." He looked at her across the table. The lamp was low. His face in the half-dark was very tired, but something else, too. Something that hadn't been there in the same way before. "I don't know why you're doing all this," he said. "What do you mean? You're being paid to cook and mind the children." Adeline picked up the papers and set them neatly on the edge of the table. "Yes," she said. "And this is the kind of place where if the roof falls in, there's no money for another. So I have an interest in keeping it standing." He was quiet. "Besides," she said, and she kept her voice even, "I've been here 4 months. Whether I meant to or not, I care what happens here. She said goodnight and went to bed. She lay there in the dark and listened to the house settle around her, which was what old houses did, and she thought about care, what it meant, how quietly it could arrive, how it changed the shape of things when it was in a room. She didn't sleep well, but in the morning she felt strangely lighter. The letter to the land office worked. Sutherland's claim was investigated and dismissed by September. Kincaid told her in a flat, private way that she suspected was as close as he got to relief. The summer stretched out and then began to turn. The light changed. The mornings came cooler. The children went back to the school in town, and the house had a different shape to its days. Quieter in the middle, fuller at the ends when they came home. Bram came to her one afternoon in September. He didn't come inside. He stood at the back door and waited until she noticed him. Bram? He had something in his hand. He held it out. It was a drawing, done more carefully than anything she'd seen from him before. The ranch again, but this time not just the buildings. There were people in it. Small, careful figures. A woman in the kitchen garden. A boy following close behind her. "You can have it," he said. His voice was carefully neutral. Adeline looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she looked at him. He was watching her with that old assessing look, but she could see the uncertainty underneath it now, the thing that needed to know whether this would be received or deflected. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. He turned to go. "Bram." He stopped. "Would you teach me? The drawing, I've never been good at it." He turned back. The look on his face, surprise, and something more than that, something that had been waiting a long time to be asked a question like this, was the most unguarded she'd ever seen him. "Okay," he said. After that, on Sundays, they sat at the kitchen table with pencils and paper. He was a quiet teacher, precise about the things that mattered, patient in a way she hadn't expected. Kincaid walked past once and saw them and didn't say anything, but she caught the look on his face before he turned away. Something in it that she wasn't ready to examine. The first snow came in October. Early light, more a warning than the real thing. It dusted the yard and was gone by noon. Kit was inconsolable about it. "It went away," he said, looking out the window at the bare ground. "It'll come back," Adeline told him. "What if it doesn't? It always does. Alberta doesn't forget winter." She picked him up, which she'd started doing with the ease of long practice. He looped his arms around her neck. "Come help me with the bread." He always came to help with the bread. October turned quiet and long. The work slowed slightly as the season changed. There was a different kind of settling into the days. Wood to bring in, preserves to check, the last of the garden to put to bed. Adeline's hands had changed over the months. They were rougher now, capable in a different way than they'd been when she arrived. She was laying out the preserves one evening when Kincaid came in and leaned against the counter. He did this sometimes now. Appeared in the kitchen not because he needed something, but just because it was where things were happening. She'd stopped being surprised by it. "I have to go to Edmonton next week," he said. 2 days, maybe 3. The livestock agent wants to meet in person. Adeline counted jars. "All right, the children. We'll be fine. We've managed before." He was quiet. "Is there something else?" she asked. He set his hands on the counter. He was looking at the jars rather than her. "Sutherland asked me something in town today. About you." She stopped counting. "What did he ask?" "Whether I was planning to make things permanent." A pause. With the arrangement. She could feel the shape of this conversation, where it was going, what it was asking under the surface of what it was saying. She kept her voice level. "What did you tell him?" "That it wasn't his business." "Good answer." Kincaid looked at her then. "But I've been thinking about it." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the yard. "What have you been thinking?" Adeline asked. "That you've been here almost 6 months. That the children—" He stopped. Started again. "That this is harder to imagine without you in it than I thought it would be." He said it carefully, like a man reading from a document he wasn't sure was accurate. "When I hired you, it was because I needed practical help." That's still true. But that's not all of what this is anymore. Adeline set down the jar she was holding. "I'm not good at this," he said. "Saying things. My wife used to tell me I communicated like a fence post. She wasn't wrong." That surprised a short sound out of him. Half a laugh, barely. "No." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know this isn't. I know why you came here. I know you didn't have another choice. And I don't want you to feel like—" He stopped. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know." Adeline looked at him. She had spent 6 months being careful, being useful, being practical about every single thing, because careful and useful and practical were what she knew how to be. Because she had learned early that the world did not often reward women who hoped for too much, but she was very tired of not saying true things. "I know why I came here," she said, "and I know why I stayed." She kept her eyes on his, and those aren't the same reason. He was very still. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," she said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just—" She picked the jar back up. I'm telling you the truth. Kincaid stood there for a long moment. Then he said, Miss Marsh, Adeline, she said. He said it, Adeline. Like he was testing the weight of it. She kept counting jars, but her hands were not quite steady. That night, after everyone was asleep, she stood at her window and looked out at the yard, the barn, the dark shape of the hills against a sky full of stars. She thought about the letter in her pocket from months ago. You have nothing left there, Adeline. Her mother had been right, she supposed, but her mother had been thinking of it as a loss. Adeline was thinking of it differently now. The days that followed were the same as the ones before. Same work, same rhythms, same household full of children who needed things, but something had shifted underneath it all. A slightly different quality to the silence between her and Kincaid. Not worse, not better, exactly, but more honest. He left for Edmonton on Tuesday. He came back on Thursday, which was earlier than he'd said, and when he walked in the door there was a package under his arm wrapped in brown paper. Adeline was at the stove. She turned when she heard the door. You're early, she said, finished sooner than expected. He set the package on the table. That's for you. She wiped her hands on her apron and came to look. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a good wool shawl, dark green, the kind that would last years. Nothing frivolous, entirely practical. She stood there holding it. I noticed your other one is getting thin at the elbows, he said. He was looking at the window. Winter's coming in hard this year. She held the shawl for a moment without saying anything. Then, thank you. He nodded and went to wash up, but she caught the set of his shoulders as he left, looser than usual, like something had been resolved. She wore the shawl that evening at supper. Louisa noticed immediately and gave her a look that was approximately 9 years old and approximately 40. Kit wanted to know if it was made from sheep. Bram didn't say anything, but he glanced at his father and then at Adeline with a considering look. Later, doing the dishes, Adeline heard Bram in the other room ask his father something. She couldn't make out the words, only Kincaid's answer. Yes. She didn't know what the question had been, but she thought she could guess. November brought snow that stayed. The land went white and quiet, and the world shrank to the ranch and the road to the school and the small warm radius of the house. Kit was happy, which meant everyone else was slightly less exhausted. He played in the snow with a seriousness of purpose that made it look like important work, and came inside at intervals to show Adeline things he'd found. Icicles, boot prints, a bird feather half buried in the drift beside the porch. One evening, Adeline found Kincaid in the barn, not working, just standing with his hand on the neck of the big roan gelding, the way you stood with something you trusted. She'd come to check on a hen that had been off her feed. She found the hen. She also found, without meaning to, a moment that felt private. She started to back out quietly. You don't have to go, he said, without turning around. She stayed. The barn was warm the way barns were. The heat of the animals, the deep smell of hay and leather and winter and livestock. The roan shifted. I come out here sometimes, Kincaid said, when things are loud in my head. Adeline leaned against the wall. What's loud tonight? He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said in the kitchen. He didn't say which night, but she knew. That you stayed because of something other than necessity. Yes, he turned to face her. The lantern light was low. I need to say something, and I'm going to say it badly. That's all right. My wife. He stopped, started again. I loved her for a long time, and I still do, and I think that doesn't go away. I've stopped expecting it to. His hands dropped from the horse's neck. But he looked at her. Something changed when you came. Slowly. The way everything happens slowly on a ranch. And I don't know what to call it, but I know it's there. Adeline looked at him steadily. That's not badly said. I'm not finished. A breath. I know this isn't what you planned when you came here. I know you came because you had to. But you could have stayed and been miserable and done the work and nothing more, and you didn't. You put yourself into this place, into these children. His jaw tightened in a way she recognized now. Not hardness, but the effort of saying something important, and I would like. He stopped. I would like to know if there's a possibility for something more than the arrangement. Adeline let the words sit for a moment. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes, she said again clearly, because he seemed to need it. There is a possibility. They stood in the barn in the lamplight and the warm animal smell of winter, and neither of them moved toward the other, and neither of them needed to. Not yet. Something had been said. That was enough for tonight. She left him there with the horse. She walked back through the snow to the house, her new wool shawl pulled around her shoulders. The cold was sharp and clean, and she didn't hurry. Inside, Louisa was reading at the kitchen table. She looked up when Adeline came in. It's cold out, Louisa observed. It is. Adeline hung up her coat. Pa's still in the barn? He'll be in soon. Louisa watched her for a moment with those serious two-old eyes. Then she went back to her book. Christmas came with the particular mixture of grief and gladness that the second year of loss always carries, Harder in some ways than the first because the first was still numb. Kincaid was quiet through most of the preparations, and Adeline didn't try to fill the quiet, only moved alongside it, making space for whatever needed to be felt. They had a small tree. Kit insisted on it, and Bram dragged one in from the tree line without complaining, which Adeline counted as a significant event. Louisa made paper decorations with a precision that would have been excessive in any other 9-year-old. On Christmas Eve, Kincaid came in from the barn carrying something. He set it on the table in front of Adeline. It was a small wooden box, plain and well-made, with a simple pattern carved into the lid. Not ornate, just careful. The work of a person who had taken their time. "I made it," he said. She opened it. Inside, resting on a piece of clean cloth, was a ring. Plain gold, no ornamentation. "It was my mother's," Kincaid said. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the box. "She gave it to me before she died. She said to give it when I was certain," he swallowed. "I'm certain." Adeline looked at the ring for a long moment. "Are you asking me?" she said quietly. He looked at her then. His eyes were very direct, like they always were, and underneath the directness there was something open that she didn't often see. "I'm asking you," he said, "not because it makes sense on paper, not because the children need it, though they do. Because I would like—" His voice roughened slightly. "I would like you to be here, not as a hired woman, as mine, and for me to be yours." The kitchen was very still. Adeline picked up the ring. "Yes," she said. She said it the same way she said most things, plainly, without ceremony. But she meant it with her whole self, which was perhaps the only kind of meaning that mattered. His exhale was very quiet, like a door that had been held closed for a long time, finally let go. He put the ring on her finger. It fit, which she took as a small sign from a world that was not usually in the habit of giving them. Bram found out at breakfast the next morning. He sat very still for a moment, looking between his father and Adeline. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and hugged Adeline briefly and awkwardly, the way 13-year-old boys who are not used to hugging manage it. She hugged him back. He sat down and finished his eggs and didn't say another word about it. But his face was different. Louisa said, formally, "I think that's a good decision," as though she'd been consulted and approved the outcome. Then she went back to her porridge. Kit, when told, asked if this meant he could call her Mama. Adeline felt something in her chest catch and then open. "If you want to," she said. "I want to," he said simply, and put his spoon back in his bowl. They were married in February, in the small church in town, on a morning so cold the air sparkled. There were no elaborate preparations. Adeline wore a good blue dress that the minister's wife had helped her alter, and she carried a sprig of dried lavender because there was nothing else to carry, and it was the best thing she could think of anyway. The children sat in the front row. Bram sat very straight. Louisa held Kit's hand to keep him still. Kit mostly managed it, except for the part where he whispered loudly to Louisa that he was hungry, which made the minister's wife laugh and then press her lips together. Kincaid, Everett, she had started calling him in private, finding her way to it slowly, held her hand through the whole short ceremony and didn't look away from her face. She said her vows clearly, without trembling. She had decided she was not going to tremble. When the minister said the marriage was complete, Kit stood up and clapped, which no one had told him to do. Bram looked mortified. Louisa patted her brother's arm with the patient exhaustion of an eldest sibling everywhere. Adeline laughed. It came out surprised and real, and Everett looked at her when she laughed. And whatever was in his expression when he did was not something she would try to describe, only something she would remember. They rode home through the cold in the wagon, the children bundled in blankets, Kit asleep before they'd made it a mile. The foothills were white and still all around them. "All right?" Everett asked. "Yes," Adeline said. He nodded. His hand found hers under the blanket, his fingers rough and warm and certain. Spring came again the way it always did, late and a little mean, and then suddenly and all at once. The snow went back, the ground softened, the horses grew restless. The kitchen garden needed turning over, and Adeline turned it, getting the angle right the way she'd been shown, which still made her think of evenings and lamplight and two people learning the shape of each other. She was not the woman who had stepped down from the mail wagon a year ago. That woman had been careful and self-contained and very practiced at expecting nothing. She had not been unhappy, exactly. She had simply been alone in the way that you don't realize until you aren't anymore. This life was harder than anything she had imagined it would be. The work was relentless. The winters were brutal. The land had no sentiment about any of it and demanded its due regardless. But Louisa still brought her schoolwork to the kitchen table every evening. Bram still came on Sundays with his pencils and his considered way of looking at things. Kit still brought her stones and feathers and whatever else he found of interest, and she took all of it seriously, because it was given seriously. And Everett, who had been a fence post once, who had communicated in the manner of a man who believed words were something to be rationed carefully, Everett was learning to say things. She watched it happen the way she watched the garden, with patience and a quiet kind of attention. "I missed you," he said one evening when he came in from a long day, and it was a simple sentence, but the way he said it was not simple at all. She heard in it everything he still didn't quite know how to say. "I was here all day," she said. "I know." A pause. "I still missed you." She put down what she was doing and looked at him, and he looked back, and that was enough. Later, much later, she would try to explain to Louisa, now older, writing her own letters to her own future, what it meant to arrive somewhere with nothing and find everything. Not the easy everything of stories, not a life without difficulty, without grief, without the weight of the past pressing in from time to time. But something that was more real than that. Something that had been built by two people who had both arrived at the far edge of something and found in the choosing a way forward. Home, she would tell her, isn't the place. It's the decision to stay. And she had decided. Every day she decided. That was the whole of it, and it was more than enough.